Now, one thing is what is legal, and another, as Anna Söder also mentioned, is what is right and what is fair and how to decide on that. So when the law is not yet in practice or in place, ethics must be governing. And in Sweden, the media industry collaborated on a shared agreement on how to go about AI transparency. They drew up 7 recommendations on when and how Swedish media consumers should be informed about the use of AI in editorial media products. For this keynote, we have one of the organizers of this event on stage. She has been appointed to be at the forefront of the Swedish media's recommendation for use of AI in journalism. Please welcome Head of InLab at Schibsted, Agnes Stenbom.
Hi, everyone. I have had the privilege of leading a quite interesting project in the Swedish media industry this winter, where we've looked at how we might bring transparency, AI transparency, from ideal to practice. Is there something wrong with my mic? I will say something new. Is this better? Is it even great? Good. So I want to spend a few minutes to tell you about this project, but before we get there, I want to talk about lemons. In 2001, the economist George Akerlof was awarded a Nobel Prize for showing how asymmetric information can push quality goods out of markets. Or phrased differently, if buyers and sellers on a market don't have the same or enough information available to assess the quality of goods traded, the high quality goods will eventually have to leave the market. With a seminal paper called The Market for Lemons, Akerlof turned to the metaphor of used cars to illustrate this phenomena in practice. He called used cars of bad quality lemons and used cars of high quality peaches. So imagine that you are a buyer browsing for a used car on a marketplace. On this marketplace, sellers of used cars only provide very limited information about the quality of their car. You have no idea how far this car has been driven, the style of the driver, or how loud the music has been blasted on the speakers, if they might even be broken. As a buyer, you have no way of determining the product quality. You don't know if the car that you might be buying is a lemon or a peach, high or low quality. So your best bet is to assume that it's somewhere in the middle and offer a price accordingly. Why would you pay for a peach if you don't know whether you might be buying a lemon? If you're a seller on this market, this leads you to question whether you should be selling at all, or if you might even consider lowering the quality of your product to match the offered price from the buyer. Why would you sell what you know is a peach for the price of a lemon? Ultimately, the peaches have to get out. I sometimes feel like our industry, and specifically journalism, seems unwilling or even unable to learn from theories from other industries, or when it's not explicitly about journalism. We limit ourselves to a small box and think within it. Oops. While I do recognize that upholding the democratic function of journalism sure is very different from selling used cars, I think it's important to recognize that we also operate on a market, the information market. And as the amount of lemons on our market can be expected to increase, not least with the growth of automated content, global tensions, and commercial logics in a globalized world, I think it's critical that we start thinking seriously about how we can avoid or mitigate the risks of asymmetric information in our market. The concept of buyers and sellers having the exact same amount of information available about the goods traded on a market, that's more theoretical than practical. It's hard to bring to real life. but making sure that we give our consumers, our buyers, enough information so that they can trust the quality of our product and that they know that they're buying a peach. That seems like a fruitful way forward to mitigating asymmetric information. I also think in this evolving information market that it's critical that we, in the editorial media, assuming that we are peaches, that we make sure that we don't fail or fall over for market pressures and lower the quality of our goods to match the rest of the market. So, how do we navigate these challenges? How do we mitigate asymmetric information? Transparency seems like a good starting point. Making sure that our users have meaningful information about the way that we use AI in our editorial media products might be a way to avoid asymmetric information. The EU seems to agree, and you just learned about the piece of legislation that has been decided on in Brussels. And in this piece of legislation, a few different obligations are put on model deployers and providers. Zooming in on AI-generated content, as you learned, this new piece of legislation demands that you need to disclose that it has been artificially generated, but not if you're in our industry. If the content has undergone an editorial process or human review, and if there's a human or legal person available or accountable for the published content, you're off the hook. So, does that mean that we shouldn't care about transparency? Obviously not. You've already heard it from Anna and from Natalie. Just because it's not dictated by law, that doesn't mean that it's not in our best interest and in our users' best interest to be transparent about the way that we use AI. Whenever I think about motivation for transparency, I tend to turn to kind of the opposite. I look at opacity and think about the risks of the alternative. What happens if we're not transparent? Opacity, or opaque products or processes, it's not a default negative thing, but many of us have a negative understanding of the word opacity. Opacus is Latin for shady, and for me at least, I come to think of shady business happening in shady environments or darkened rooms. And there are both epistemic and ethical and regulatory issues with opacity, ranging from us not being able to explain, validate, or understand different processes, or being able to give our informed consent, make our own moral evaluation. So it seems only fitting that we bring things out of the dark and are more transparent. Perhaps that is why our industry has been so quick to say that transparency is an ideal that we want to pursue, especially when we're using AI. In a very timely study done by Felix, who we'll learn from in just a few minutes, we learned that in a review of 52 different media AI policies from different organizations around the world, 90% of them reference transparency as one of the core ideals, one of the things that we need to protect. But 83% of those had no explanation about how that would be brought to practice. Luckily, we in the Nordic AI Journalism Network were able to dig into that very question. We gathered 13 Swedish media organizations, 18 leaders from 13 different organizations, for a shared exploratory process around the specific topic of how. How might we bring AI transparency to practice in journalism? We did this process this winter under the umbrella of the Swedish publishers organization, Utgivarna. Our group included technical, editorial, product, strategic expertise, and we were complemented with juridical advice from Utgivarna. And many of the people who were involved in this process are in this room today, which I'm very happy about. We worked together in facilitated workshops where we asked two questions. First, we looked at how we might frame and understand the challenge. So we asked the question, for what and when do we need to be transparent? And then when we scoped that challenge, we looked at how we might bring it to practice. Where and how can transparency be implemented? Our focus was exclusively on how we inform our users about our use of AI, and that's important to understand, because this is a quite specific delimitation. We sometimes talk about transparency very broadly, but we have a very specific delimitation. So in this case, we are editorial media companies. Our users are people consuming our editorial media products, and our use of AI are the instances where we have actively chosen to use AI in our product or in our process and want to inform our audience about that. There are lots of other really valuable ways that you could look at AI transparency, and there are many projects that we need to have where scopes are different. For example, we need to be looking at how platform companies where there's user-generated content can be transparent about AI in that content, verification processes, content provenance, lots of related topics. But in this specific project, we looked at something that we very much control, the way that we use AI and how we want to inform our audiences about that. Our work on this still quite broad topic boiled down to 7 recommendations, and we published them all in a public report that you can all read. It's on our website, the Nordic AI Journalism website. And these recommendations that we provide, they are voluntary, and they're split into fundamental principle values and practical recommendations on how to bring those values to practice. So since this is all published, I won't go through every recommendation in detail, but I'll do some deep dives where I think it's relevant. So starting with our fundamentals, the most important thing here and what really underpins our whole approach in this process is that we think that only AI that has had a significant journalistic impact has to be transparent or informed to the user. And the definition of what significant journalistic impact means has to be an editorial decision. We don't find it desirable or suitable to define a fixed limit or a fixed type of content that we need to inform users about. But instead, we want our newsrooms, our editorial teams, to take the responsibility to evaluate for themselves on a continuous basis what the impact of AI has been on the journalism. And here, I think that our evaluations will be deeply influenced by what we understand journalism to be. If we understand journalism as content, then informing audiences about how a piece of content has been produced seems relevant. It has had a significant impact on journalism if you believe that it's content. If you believe that journalism is knowledge production, cultural artifacts, or something different, then you will inform in different ways. And I think that a lot of media organizations will define this in different ways, and I'm not so sure that we have an answer to this today, what we think that journalism is and when that has been impacted. Moving on to our more practical recommendations, we focus a lot on where and how information should meet our audiences. And first off, just to counter audience perceptions of AI being this autonomous force, we decided that it's important to talk about specific types of AI tools. So we want to talk about AI as a tool, an AI tool or powered by an AI tool, rather than just saying an AI did it, because we think it's important that we take a responsibility to not anthropomorphize these technologies. We also think that information needs to be shared in direct connection to the consumed piece of content or the product experience that AI has significantly impacted. This is different from some of the other approaches or suggestions that I've heard in this conference where we've said it's enough to have it in a policy. We think that if it has had a significant impact, it needs to be informed to the audience in connection to that impact. It's not enough to have it in a policy somewhere. More specifically then, when we look at where or how we should be informing our audiences, we are recommending or suggesting a harmonized approach to language use around AI in the Swedish media industry. Specifically, we are looking at generative AI. And here our key motivation is that we think that media consumers will have an easier time to understand the impact of AI in our field if we have a fairly similar way of communicating around these tools. Some users use a lot of different media brands and might have to relate to a lot of very different ways of talking or describing AI. So we think it's easier for the user to understand if we have a harmonized approach. And this was largely motivated, this focus on generative AI specifically, was largely motivated by the point of time that we're in. There's a huge societal interest in generative AI right now, also a lot of concern. I think we're at the peak of the hype cycle. And us having a way of giving an audience a better understanding of the actual impact of these tools on editorial media might be a way to bring the cycle down, to at least move further to some kind of plateau of productivity. Just a reminder on what it means to spark understanding, how we make people understand what these tools means. I think sometimes we default to transparency being us providing a lot of information. But transparency research is quite clear, saying that information-rich communication is not the same as transparent communication. Saying more doesn't necessarily do more in terms of understanding. So instead, we need to figure out a way to meaningfully work towards understanding and transparency. And here we think that our language, the way that we choose our words matters. You might ask what's in a word, but looking at our discussion in this group of project participants, possibly a lot is hidden in the ways that we describe these tools. So when considering different ways to formulate that AI has been involved, we talked about a lot of different things. A very common way to describe it today is that content has been produced with the help of AI. But as discussed in our network, we think that this sends a signal that they are somehow superior to us, that we need the help of some vague AI being. And similarly, another quite common phrase is together with AI, created together with AI. We think that a word like that somehow implies that AI is a being, possibly a human or human-like one, but at least something with some type of agency or even consciousness. Another word that we talked about was via, created via AI. This is something that we said in the discussion was too vague to do anything. You don't get a meaningful understanding from this word. But a word that we did like was support. We think that that indicates that AI is a tool that we can use to be supported in doing our tasks. So that's the one that we went for. So we recommend for the Swedish media industry a harmonized approach to describing generative AI whenever that generative AI has had a significant journalistic impact. We want to phrase it something like this. We want to describe the content in definite form and that it is created with the support of an AI tool for a specific task. And whenever it's relevant, we also want to provide some more details around that specific tool. And those additional details, for example, the name of the model, the version of the model, the weights of the model, the temperature of the model, that will have to be an editorial decision to decide when that is relevant to the consumer's understanding of the piece of content they're consuming. I personally think that investigative journalism is a perfect example of when that is necessary. If you use the model that has been part of that knowledge production, the investigation, then describing the details of that model will be a really good way for users or readers or viewers to hold you accountable to your investigation, to know how you got to the final journalism. Using a trivial example, if this Harry Potter-inspired frog illustration that I made somehow made its way into an editorial media and was deemed to have a significant journalistic impact, this would be the way that we would describe it. This illustration was created with the support of a AI tool for image generation, DALL-E. Sometimes we have to mention the models because it's in the terms and conditions. I do not feel that we are all aware of that and sometimes think we have a choice, but please read the terms and conditions of the models that you're using because you might have to disclose it. This is not exactly rocket science, but I do think it's important to recognize how people's understanding of information cannot be separated from their lived experiences, from their interests, from their capacities, from their social conditions. So making sure that we understand how this message, this language, is received in different audience groups is really important going forward. So in this work that we did together in the industry, this is across different types of brands with different types of users. We built that on research done by others and by our own respective organizations. But now that we have the proposed language, we need to test that locally. So we all need to see how this resonates with old and young, men and women, different socioeconomic groups. There's lots of different factors that we need to test this on. And I think that can be quite fun, and we can tweak the language in ways that make the most sense for our specific group of readers. But now we have a shared foundation to work from. This project won't radically change anything in the media industry. It won't transform how people in society broadly understand AI, but we still think that this is a constructive step forward for our industry. Perhaps most importantly, because it has pushed us to discuss what journalistic impact really is, and with that, what journalism really is. The more we think about how we want to inform our users, the more we think about what we actually want to do, how we want to use AI, and how and what we would be proud to share with our users. It's kind of like the classic saying, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I hope that this step that we're taking as an industry now possibly leads to a lot of further steps, more thoughts, more questions, more ideas. Hopefully, that will make us have peaches in the information market for a long foreseeable future. I will now stop with the fruit metaphors and thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Agnes. I think we all want to be peaches in the room now, right? And to expand a little bit on what you ended on, so how far should you go? Because I'm sure you discussed this well in the group. Do these recommendations go far enough? What can we do? Where should we stop? I read that they're non-binding. You didn't sign a contract and you can get a fine if you didn't do it. Why did you decide to do it like that?
So this process was all about exploring, gaining new knowledge together as an industry. And I think not having a contract to sign at the end of that exploration was a quite important part of us creating an open discussion arena with organizations that are not used to discussing these topics so practically together. So I think having it open and exploratory was a really important part of making the project happen. Then I think it's fun to see how that was kind of part of the pitch. It's non-binding, please join the conversation. But when we finally had the recommendations, a lot of people in the group wanted them to be binding because they think they're good. We agreed on something, why don't we just say that we are going to do this? We're not binding anyone by contract, but I think that sends a signal that even though they are voluntary, we want to do this. We want to hold ourselves accountable to this work and these ideas that we came up with.
And as you mentioned, it's kind of rare that the whole industry kind of goes together and let's agree on something. Let's figure out what to do with this. But as I understand it, this must also be an iterative process, right? You have to evaluate on how this works. You mentioned that. When will you meet again? How will you do this ongoing?
Yeah, so it's one of the recommendations is that we have to treat this as an iterative topic. There will be no definite truths. So the first kind of stop on our iteration as a group is that in 6 months, we're doing a shared review. Did we follow our own recommendations? Did we do what we said we wanted to do? But I also think it's important that we locally iterate and kind of have those conversations, not wait until 6 months to look at how we're implementing. But it might be that in 6 months, we want to change a word or we think our approach was wrong, let's do it again. And that's, to me, not a failure, because the conversations that we've had about journalism and journalistic impact are still meaningful. So that's part of the process.
And you're not the only one labeling right now, right? Meta announced recently that they will be labeling all AI content. What do you think of that announcement and kind of the consequences of that?
Yeah, so I haven't had time to properly digest it, but I think it's good. And I think as a platform for user-generated content, they have a very different set of conditions than we have, but they also have a responsibility to make sure that the content on that platform is trustworthy, or at least sticks to some kind of guidelines. So I think it's good. There are lots of related projects, not least at the Media Future Center in Bergen that Schibsted is part of hosting or running, where they're looking at kind of content provenance, C2PA, I always get the 2 and the P wrong, but a really interesting method for content verification and then labeling. So I think it's good, this overall movement.
Yeah, because they went with made with AI, right? And that's the only one meta, as far as I know.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we have a question from Nick, and yeah, it's over here. Oh my God, Nick. Okay, let's try it. See how it goes. Nice. Nailed it.
Great talk. Thanks so much. I was curious if there was any consensus in the group on this idea of journalistically significant impact. Did you reach any kind of common ground around a set of things that we all agree warrant this kind of transparency, or agreement on things where we think it's unnecessary?
I would say that there are kind of some overarching agreements, but more interestingly, disagreements on things where I just assumed we would agree. For example, recommendation systems is one of those topics where we did not agree. And to me, that goes back to the understanding of what journalism is, if it's an experience or if it's one individual piece of content. So I would say almost half of the group seem to think that it is absolutely kind of course that we have to inform users about AI-powered recommender systems, while the other half of the group says, but the content that is being recommended is editorial content, so the content in itself is kind of already done. That's one of those cases where we did not agree on what journalistic impact meant. But to kind of those principles as to what journalistic impact is, that could be a great next step, a great possible follow-up project. So if any of you in the room want to be part of that, just reach out.
Do we have any more questions? Yes, we have one up here in front. Could anyone help pass? Not me. Anyone catch? Over here, yay! And over here, thank you.
Thank you. Great talk, Agnes, thank you. Question about a near future, or in few years when tools we are used are much more common. Do you still think that we need to label the use of AI? And the one discussion in Finland where we have a similar set of rules being set out by the National Press Council, one discussion has been that we are not putting Excel, this story was done by Excel. So what was your discussion around this topic?
Very similar, and with the same example. We talked about how in a few years we might be looking back at this project and saying, we had internet in this story, that it's the same type of development. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how quickly we're going to come to that, or if we're ever going to come to that point. But of course, AI will be more common. I'm not sure we're ever going to come to a point where we don't want to talk about it at all, because it is different. It is a different type of technology, especially since it leads more or it connects more into knowledge production than mere information handling. So I think we might still want to talk about it, maybe in a different way, probably. But yeah, the future will have to tell.
Thank you so much, Agnes Stenbom. Let's give her a hand. Thank you.